I was born on July 13th, 1955 in Springdale, Arkansas. My mom and dad's names were Buster Granata. Some people know him as Lawrence or an LB. And my mother's name was Lillian Cordiana. My grandparents on my dad's side was, his name was Leopold John Granata, and his wife's name was Mary Fiore. And on my mom's side, my grandfather's name was Sil Cordiana. Some people call him Celeste. My grandmother on my mother's side name was Mary Chola. I've got 3 sisters and 1 younger brother. Martha is my oldest sister, Carolyn, and then I got Darlene, and then I got a younger brother named Bobby. When I was young, the family business, we were farmers. We had chicken houses and we had a dairy. We raised about, I think, 36,000 chickens every 9 weeks, and we had 30-some milking cows. And later on in my life, about 8, 9 years old, my dad got a wild hankering and had worked his way and bought an 8-lane bowling alley in Bentonville, Arkansas. And we started in the bowling alley business in 1963, I believe, and still into the bowling business to this day. Well, the first bowling alley we bought was in Bentonville, Arkansas, and I was young, little kid, and really I was too young to do much of anything, but it was a one-man operation. We would run the cafe, the family run the cafe, the family run the front desk, and we also kept the machinery going in the back, get the bowling machines running. So I pretty much stayed up front and worked in the cafe, serving Cokes, would help give a hamburger and some French fries. And then as I got a little older, I worked my way into going back to the back and getting a bowling ball back that was hung up, or a pin was in the gutter or something like that, and went from there. What I remember about the farming business when I was little, we had chickens, and like I said, the chickens would come through every 9 weeks, and I would help my dad a little bit. I was pretty young, but carry feed. We'd sprinkle the feed into the little cardboard feeders by hand, and check the waters, made sure they all had, the water fountains weren't working correctly. And then I remember once in a while I would go help my dad, or I could go get the cows and run them in the pen for us to milk morning and night, but I would do it in the morning. I'd do it in the evening after I come home after school. And my job was to feed them a little grain while they were being milked. And that was probably, and I drove the tractors, and we did our own hay work and brush hogging and that on the farm until we did it forever, really, and then we got into the bowling business. In the early part of my life, in the summertime, we would, very rural working community, and we would harvest hay, and everybody would square bale their hay. And so there were crews of young guys, kids, that would go around and haul hay for the farmers and get it out of the field and put it on the trailer, bring it to the barn, unload it, put it in the barn, stack it in the barn, and that's pretty much was our summer jobs. I got paid $1.50 cents a bale when I first started doing it. And when I finally graduated from it, when I got paid, I got 2 cents a bale. So and there were days we would haul 1,000 bales of hay and I'd get $20 and had the world by the tail. And later on, when I was in high school, my first job that I ever had outside of the family, I worked for Walmart. I worked at Walmart number 3. And they were building number 54. They started building 54, so that's how early the days were when I worked for Walmart. I got paid $1.60 an hour. The store that I worked for at Walmart was it was in the north end of Springdale, and I worked in the departments of sporting goods, hardware, paint, and automotive, and loved it. Had a blast. Well, life was pretty simple back when I was a kid. I can remember my parents, we lived on the farm, we milked cows, we raised chickens, and when I was real small, I can remember people coming to the house at night, and my mom and dad they played cards. And up to three nights a week, there would be people that would come, different crews, different families, different couples, 2 or 3 couples, and they would come and play cards at the house, and for 2 or 3 hours at a time. I mean, and that's what they did for entertainment, laughed and cut up, and that's some of the early part of life. I can't tell you anything else. It was just pretty simple, you know. Well, I went to the Taneytown Elementary School, and we were taught by nuns. We would go to church every day before school. And matter of fact, I think the school bus dropped us off at the church. I think that's where they stopped to let us off. And we had to go to church every day before we would go to school. There was the grocery store, Tontitown Mercantile, and was the landmark of Taneytown at the time. Everyone would go there to get a pop, a Coke, soda, cupcakes, stuff like that. Between that and the church and the school, that was about all there was at Taneytown at the time. There was I vaguely remember a feed mill being across the road from the store, and there was the Hartman Cafe and a little tavern that was there, beer tavern, I guess I could say that. And there was another store that a Mersani owned, just right down there, just a few hundred yards away, but there was a little store, but the Mercantile was owned by Artermani. Very tall guy, big guy, very stout voice, and always called me Granata all the time. And of course, he had fun with me. I was just a little kid. It was just the place where everyone went in Taneytown. It was just, that was it. That was where you went. It was our hardware store. It had our food, had everything you needed to make life better for you at your house, and everything, plumbing, hardware, anything you had. Of course, again, life was simple. We didn't have all the indemnities that we have today and stuff to more stuff to break. One of the funniest things that I remember when I was a kid, I always, every year, I couldn't wait. We would go to church the day after Halloween, and I have to say this because it was funny. We would go to there was this caution light at this main intersection in Taneytown. There wasn't a stoplight. And every year, tradition, they being youth kids, they were old enough to drive, and they would just pull pranks, I guess. They do the same thing about every year, but they would go and there were outhouses. Everyone had outhouses. And there was always a crew of people that would go and get an outhouse or two and put them in the middle of the intersection in Taneytown. And then was probably a little beer drinking going on back in the days, and we didn't have a dump or a trash waste management and stuff like that, and everyone just had piles of cans, and if you was a place where a watering hole was, you had beer cans, and they would go get pickup loads of beer cans and put the outhouses in the middle of the intersection and put pickup loads of beer cans all around them. And then they would go to the store and write graffiti all over the store with soapstones, shaving cream, shoe polish, Happy Halloween, and put the streamers and stuff, and absolutely unbelievable. And maybe someone somewhere sometime has got it. Someone might have a picture of that, but I can remember that. And always Halloween, day after Halloween, I couldn't wait to go see it because it was hilarious of what they would do every year. I'd went to the Venetian Inn a few times. My aunt was running the Venetian Inn, but we didn't go out to eat when I was small. But as I got a little bit older, we would visit the Venetian Inn. Once in a while, we would go to Mary Meister's to eat, which was another restaurant in Tontitown, very successful. But being that my aunt owned and run the Venetian Inn, Alice Leatherman and Paul Leatherman, that's where we went. We would usually go over, and it was family. So, you know, I got plenty of spaghetti, and I got plenty of rolls and salad and chicken, and I guess that's the reason why I got to be as tall, as big as I did. I lived 2.5 miles west of Tontitown on my dad's farm, which was next to my grandfather's farm, in the rolling hills. It's just very, very right next to Harmon Road. It was the only place I lived, never moved. To this day, I live 300 yards from where I was raised. Going to school in Tontitown, in grade school, we had 7 boys and 7 girls in my class. There were 14 of us. We didn't have air conditioning, so we had big windows in the big school, and we had them open, and we did have a fan. I guess the thing to look forward to the most was probably recess, because we could go eat, and then we'd go out and get to play in the playgrounds for an hour. And that was always a big deal for all of us to go out and have a good time. The nuns taught us all through the elementary side. That was grades 1 through 6. And we had some nuns that were pretty rough. We had some that were pretty nice. I can remember Sister Mary Carlos was very nice nun. I also remember Sister Mary Winifred, very rough, very rough. I also remember a nun by the name of Sister Mary Quintilla. She was very rough as well. And those are the only 3 that I remember the names of. Whenever we were at school at Taneytown, they built a new school in Springdale called Southwest Junior High School. We were the first class of Southwest Junior High School, and they took the 7th, 8th, and 9th grades, 7th and 8th grades out of Taneytown, as well as the 9th grade, and we went to Southwest to go to junior high school. And it was our first experience from staying in one classroom the whole day to where we had a class in a different room with a different teacher every period. A culture shock, the change, unbelievable for us. And it was difficult, different. For some reason or another, the teachers really got a bang out of that crew from Taneytown. And we made an impression somewhere down the road, and a lot of the teachers later on in life that I run onto, still some from junior high, and they remember us like it was yesterday, and it's unbelievable, it's crazy. When I went to junior high school, I was a very tall kid, and the coaches, we had PE. Well, that was something new for us. We didn't have that, a PE class as such in elementary school, but we went to Springdale High School. We had PE classes, and in the PE class, we had the coaches that coached football, basketball, and track and stuff. And I, being a tall, lanky kid, they had aspirations of me being a athlete and playing football and playing basketball and track, and I can remember them working on me, trying to get me to play. my parents were working, as well as everybody's parents were working. We lived in Taneytown, 7-8 miles from the school. But to play sports in junior high school, you had to do it after school. My parents didn't have the time or couldn't come and get me to bring me home. So I couldn't play sports. So eventually they did make a carpool, and eventually I played football. I didn't go out for football until I was halfway through my 8th grade year. I did not get a set of pads or equipment until like the last 2 weeks of the season. So basically my 8th grade year, I was just there. Basketball the same way. I couldn't play basketball because I had no way to get back and forth from school. My 9th grade year, there were a number of us that played on the team from Taneytown. So everyone carpooled and we got to play. And, or I got to play, and then in junior high school playing football for my 8th grade year, where I didn't get a set of pads to even play football till the last 2 weeks of the season. My 9th grade year, as well as I remember, I never walked off the field from the time we started till the game was over with. And played all the time. Finally, eventually got to go out for basketball and played basketball, and that started kind of my want for sports. I really got into it, and I played, I lettered in high school and football for 3 years for Coach Gerald Williams, which was very rare. And I was one of the fortunate ones. I got a offer and I got a scholarship, and I went to Arkansas State University and played for them 5 years of college football at Arkansas State University. When I came back from college, I stayed, I helped my dad on the farm, and then eventually we worked my way into managing one of the bowling centers that we owned, and I did that for a long time. When I was younger, the people in Taneytown, of course I didn't get to Taneytown much, but Harry Spinola was a pretty well-known person that was involved in the city government and stuff. My grandfather at one time on Sil Cordiana was mayor of Taneytown. So I remember Harry talking a lot to my grandfather, but Harry Spinola was he knew what was going on in the town, and very knowledgeable, and anybody that the meeting place that I always thought they would meet was at the Mercantile, that everyone could always sit up there and talk a little bit, and probably was the meeting place that I thought at the time. Oh, the church, going to church, especially on Sunday at the time. There was you'd go to first or second mass on Sunday, and it was a time for worship and a time everyone would get to visit with each other, and after, and a social, very tight-knit community. When I was a kid, that would run around and do something with other kids in Taneytown, I can remember getting a bicycle and going and ride up and down some dirt roads at my grandparents' house, and that road was all dirt roads back then, was probably called Spinola Road, which is just right down from the Catholic Church. Later on, got where we could get around a little bit more. We would go hunting. That was our thing. We would go out and go rabbit hunting and squirrel hunting and quail hunting, and go around and plink with the 22s and just shoot cans. And that was our Saturday and Sunday venue whenever we were in school, of getting together and doing something like that. Well, my parents, my dad, I thought, was a workaholic. When I was little, I said my dad, I called him, there was a cartoon Popeye, and my dad was not a very big man, but he had the biggest arms and the biggest hands I've ever seen. And I always said if anyone had Popeye arms, it was my dad. They were very short arms, stout, real big, heavy muscled armed, and his fingers were absolutely huge. Now what they did, they worked. My parents, I guess, would go to a creek or go over to Grand Lake once in a while to fish. My dad loved to quail hunt. Always had bird dogs and quail hunted. My mother was a housewife and just very good, very good cook, very good seamstress, could sew anything, and was a wonderful mom. Back in my younger days when I was a kid, we couldn't wait for the Grape Festival. We would go do the rides. I wasn't a big rider, but I loved the games. I loved the little guns, the little BB gun that you would shoot and knock the targets out. There were other little, where you would throw baseballs and knock the little dolls over, knock the bottles over and stuff like that. My favorite one of all was called the crane, the shovels. And you would bring them and you would crank them and you so much and you'd come over and it'd come down over an item and you try to get down and get the jaws to grab it up, pick it up. I was just fascinated with that. I loved the food. They had hamburgers and stuff. After I had 3 older sisters, so I got to stay around a little bit longer because I could go home when they did. They had a dance every year in the basement of the schoolhouse, and they'd have a band in there. And I would go hang around there. I couldn't go down there, but I'd hang up at the top and look in the window and watch them dance for an hour or two, and that was a pretty big deal. Years and years ago, when I was working at the Grape Festival, I worked as a swamper. When they started, this dinner deal wasn't that big, and it got bigger and bigger, and so they had to get people in and people out. And so I helped them swamp tables, clean the tables, and get everything ready so we'd get some out and get some more people in. Eventually, I worked on the wheel, and it was a round wheel that went around, and there was paddles. And if the wheel ever landed on your number, you would win the prize. And back in the day, it was you spin a dime and win $1. And what it was, there were 12 paddles, and each paddle had 5 different numbers on it. And so we give away, it cost you a dime for each time we spin the wheel. And we'd go around and pick the dimes up, and then if it landed on your number, we'd give you $1. But the church made 20 cents. And that's what we did. I did that for many a year. Back in the days of the Grape Festival, especially when I was a kid, they have the Queen Concordia every year. And I have 3 sisters, and 2 of the 3 were queens for the Grape Festival. And my third one, all 3 of the sisters run, but one didn't win the Queen, but 2 did. And so it was something you look forward to every year, and a lot of hoopla for the Queen and the Queen candidates. My sister named Martha, she was Queen Concordia, and I do not know what year it was. And my other sister named Carolyn, she was Queen about 3 years later, I believe. I'm going to say it's probably in the early 60s, early to mid 60s, right along in there. I got another sister named Darlene that run, but she didn't win the Queen. There was a couple of events that we would do. Every 4th of July was a family. We have kind of a family reunion, and it was very extended. There were a lot of different families would get together. We would go to a creek somewhere, and all the moms, mothers, and the women would cook meals and bring food. The guys would go down and get lawnmowers and clean a place for us to put the tables and chairs, and they would play bocce all day long and play mata. And the women would sit around and get the food ready and sit around and talk, and then the guys would play the games, and the women would sit around and talk, and the kids would go down the creek and play in the water and fish and just play, and that was quite a big deal. The other event what happened, it was probably a weekly event, and there was always a bocce court in town. And the guys would go, I don't remember the women going, but the guys would go to the bocce court, and they'd bring them some stuff to drink, and they would play bocce all afternoon, and sometimes they'd play mata and sit around. And I do remember some eventually in the wintertime, when it got real bad, someone would play cards. They'd have a little old school bus that was there, and they'd go play cards in the school bus. And if you wanted to, you could go, and if not, it wasn't. But that's about all I remember as far as social events, other than the Grape Festival and stuff like that in Taneytown. Back in the days of the farming in the early part of life, my grandfather had a very big farm and had a winery, and he bought a lot of grapes, and he raised a lot of grapes and apples from Lincoln and other fruits, but the grapes were pretty much, he had a lot of vineyards himself. When I was a kid and go down, my dad would work in my grandfather's winery. As a matter of fact, the whole family worked. My grandfather's whole family worked in the winery, plus some other people. And I was a little kid. I'd run down there and run in and out of the winery and just play is what I was doing. But I remember seeing the barrels. Seemed like there were about like 28 barrels in the winery, I think, and I do remember seeing them all full of wine. I believe the bigger barrels, I believe, were 8,000-gallon barrels, and they were made out of cherry wood, and they were banded together and very dark, no lighting in there at all. And it was kind of spooky, but that's why I'd run around in there and just playing around. But I remember that everybody working together and bottling the wine. I remember that they would go and take the truck, and they would go to Muskogee, Oklahoma to get bottles. There was a glass making place over there, and they would go back and forth to get the glass, and they would fill a little assembly line, and with the wine that would come from the barrels, and they'd filter it, and then the only thing I really helped them do once in a while, I would go over and help them put the little sealers on the lid when they were done. They put the lid on the bottle, and then they put a little cap over it, and once in a while, that was about the most I could do, is put a little cap on it, and I had to get out of the way because I couldn't move fast enough. When I was little, my grandparents had a native stone, it was a sandstone rock house out on 68 Highway at the time. I listened to my dad talk about that because the house wasn't on the highway, and they moved it from the back of the farm to the front by the highway, and it's still by the highway to this day, but it's been moved. And my dad talks about how long it took months to move it, a quarter of a mile or half a mile or however far they moved it. And they had some kind of a deal they put it on, and they had a horse that would go around in circles. And he said, as they ever made enough circles, it winded up, and eventually the house would move 6 inches or a foot. And he said it took a long time to move the house to where it was out on the 412 highway, which is now 412 highway. And it's just every day, all the family of my grandfather worked in the winery. So every day at noon, my grandmother, my dad's mother, would cook food for the whole family every day, Monday through Friday. On the weekend, everyone kind of done their own thing. Kind of a little different deal. You kind of don't see nothing like that anymore. As far as changing the city of Taneytown, or the growth of Taneytown, when I was little, I think the population sign was 140 something, and then there was a new population, a new census. I think it had 427, and of course, this last census was 2,400 or 460, and it will be a whole lot more the next one. And I think the growth of Northwest Arkansas just is pushed this way. Taneytown has got the rolling hills, kind of the roll in the land, and I think people kind of look for that a little bit. The heritage of Taneytown, a lot of people like the heritage of background, the history of Taneytown, and just kind of are amazed that there is a little bit of history still here that goes on, and they kind of get a bang out of the Grape Festival and a few things that's recognized by people in the community. I think Taneytown's kind of a little neat community. Still, a lot of people wave at each other. I think you can tell a lot of the Italian bunch, because I think they like hearing the vowels on the end of their names, and it makes you feel like you're a part of the heritage, especially when you see some of the guys that's like that. The town has grown tremendously. I think it's grown in the right direction. We seem to be doing very well as far as growth. We've got great schools. We've got the police departments and stuff. Our crime is virtually nil as far as other places in the United States compared to what we have. It's a good sell. A lot of pretty community house estate properties around that they're very attractive for people to see, and I think people would want to be a part of that. When I was younger, I didn't travel much, but when I went to college, I did travel a little bit then, especially when I was playing football and we would go out of town. I paid attention to other places that we would go, and whether I was there or otherwise, other things I would do. And I, at the point in time, was probably maybe a little bit over mature. Would I like living here is what I would ask myself. And some of the places was all right, but at the end of the day, I loved Northwest Arkansas. I loved the rolling hills. I loved the friendship. I would drive up and down the road, and it was constantly, it was either the farmer wave or everyone would wave at everybody. Everybody knew everybody. Even when I worked in the bowling center, when I was managing the bowling center, so many people walk in the door, and I didn't know who they were. I knew an awful lot of people in Northwest Arkansas, but I see people I didn't know, and I says, why, I'd greet them, and how are you doing? I said, well, they're just moving here or come here to visit and stuff. And I go, and they just fell in love with Northwest Arkansas. And I says, why? What do you see here that you don't see at your place? You guys have got it made. He says, everyone, it was over. The value of your property the cost of living was very low. You could buy a house here, and a lot cheaper you could buy in other places. There was no crime. It was nothing short of a heaven. Like I said, a lot of people hunt a roll of land. They're not so much flatlanders as they want a little contour. And Northwest Arkansas, it's just all, and people come here and says, you don't realize what you've got. And they sell their places and come to Northwest Arkansas, and Tontitown's in the middle of it as well. So the friendship was as big a thing. A lot of them said you just couldn't beat everybody would talk to everybody. Everybody knew everybody, and it was just, and a lot of them said we don't even lock our homes at night. It's so safe a place. It's unbelievable compared to where they were 20, 30 years ago. Now, I'm not saying you do that today, but that's the way what drew an awful lot of people to Northwest Arkansas. I like the old people, the old timers, and the people. I like visiting with them, especially when I can see them every once in a while. I like that a bunch. I love the land. I love the lay of the land. I love the old people from here. I like that about as much as I think of anything. I ask many people, why do you come Northwest Arkansas? I love that question. And everybody says, man, you all just don't realize what you've got. You have no idea what you've got compared to where they've been and stuff.